So I'm Francisco Cabañas, otherwise known as Arctic Mine.
Oh.
And
1 second.
okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's coffee chat for the month of February 2019. We have a panel of people that are, very important to the Monero community here, and we're great to have you on here. Diego and several others are currently at TabConf down in Atlanta, so they might be popping in and out. They checked in with us right before, but no promises they'll be on for the coffee chat here because they still have conference obligations to speak to. But it's great that they were still able to check in with us. It's great that you're able to watch us today. Make sure to ask questions in the YouTube chat if you have them. We'll be sure to address them when we have time. But of course, let's start off with introductions. So I'm Justin. I'm at the University of Minnesota, and I do these coffee chats. I'm involved in the Monero community work group, and recently have started Breaking Monero and one episode of Breaking Zcash. We'll see if that goes anywhere. So next, how about Arctic Mine? Can you introduce yourself for everyone today, please?
Sure. I've been with the Monero project since basically 2016 as a core team member, and I did some work before on the project. Got involved in 2014. And right now, most of the kind of work that I do really has been related to scaling and work related to the adaptive block size limit, fees, etc., which is kind of what I've been working lately. And I'm on the core team.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us, Arctic Mine. You certainly are one of the most active core team members that's able to join us almost every time. So it's great to have you on. Howard, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hey, you might know me as HYC. I started working with Monero end of 2015, working on the database code. That's kind of been specialization so far, but I also work on mining code and anything else that comes up.
Thank you, Howard. It's great to have you on. And again, if you have any questions related to a big hot topic right now related to mining, make sure you get those in. You might be able to answer them in a decent amount of explainable detail. And then last but not least, Need Money 90. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, I've been in the community for a couple years. I'm a moderator, and I have my fingers in basically every part of the community's interactions. And I currently run a market making fund. So, yeah, nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So I wanted to kick things off with a discussion about a recent CoinSetter piece. So they recently posted a piece called "We Must Protect Our Ability to Transact Privately Online." And it goes through the history of cash, the importance of privacy in a transaction-based system. Did anyone here get a chance to read that?
Saw it go by.
Saw it go by. So Brandon Goodell, who is, you might know him as Surrey Nother from the Monero Research Lab, he had a part at helping put this together. And I think it's generally a pretty good read. It's not Monero specific, of course, but it essentially makes the case for Monero. So I think it's certainly worth a read if you have a chance. Arctic Mine, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I've actually spent a fair amount of time reading this, and the article, and it really addresses a lot of very interesting things. One of the common misconceptions when we talk about fiat in the crypto world is we tend to lump electronic fiat and cash fiat into one a lot, and they're two very different things. And the war on cash is, in many ways, cash is a complement to Monero for the in-person transaction, while Monero really comes in and shines far stronger in things where you can't be person to person. So it's a digital form, and this is a distinction that's commonly not made. I think it hits the nail on the head on a lot of things. I don't think they go a lot into the technology that drives this, but quite honestly, I'm old enough to remember when cash was king. And when you weren't discriminated against if you were a teenager, because everybody was using cash, and nobody was using these debit cards and credit cards. and nobody was using all this digital stuff, which basically is great in some areas, but it fails in a lot of cases. You can't give money to a poor person, for example, with a debit card. That's a major fail. I'll leave you with that. So I think the article hits it right on the head.
Yeah, I definitely encourage everyone. I linked it in the chat there, so if you have not read it yet, I highly encourage you to. I think it really makes a good case for why we need to maintain a lot of properties as we transition to a digital system, and why we need to support projects that are working towards this end goal. Any other comments just on that sort of even general topic about like Monero's purpose is not necessarily for like Monero's ultimate purpose is to help transition the same properties we have of money to a digital system. Is there anyone that sort of disagrees with that or has a different take on that? Okay. No one? No one?
Yeah, okay. I would argue that we needed Monero 25 years ago because we started using e-commerce in the 1990s, and e-commerce was only driven by proprietary systems, permission systems. So I don't think it's going to transition. I mean, I still see a role for cash in day-to-day transactions and in-person transactions. I think it's to meet a need that has been in place for a quarter century that hasn't really been met, of digital payments that are permissionless online. So I kind of think a bit of a different perspective of that, although I agree with the perspective. It's, yeah, we needed Monero 25 years ago, anyway.
Arctic, is there something wrong with your mic? You're clipping really bad. Like, it's very difficult to hear what you're saying.
Maybe I'm too far away. That's the reason. Okay. Is that better?
Not really. It's like clipping hard.
Okay, it's over. Let me see if I can do this.
You can see it. It's on
YouTube. Okay. Import. Okay, so if I cut it down, it should actually help. Is that better?
I don't know. I'm not sure what the issue is.
It might just generally be an old mic or something. It's hard to really tell what the situation is.
Okay.
Howard, do you want me to share that message you just sent?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So Howard sent me a message, or as we were talking about how he felt that transparent ledgers. Reading yourself briefly.
You sure?
Yeah, thanks. So HYC sent me a tweet he recently made where he says that transparent ledgers are a non-starter for digital currencies. True of Bitcoin, Ripple, and every other transparent coin. Nobody wants to transact business without privacy. And I think that's something that we really helped shift some of our narrative towards, is privacy is really required for business. And I know I've given that in many of my talks where I'll focus about how you don't want to reveal who all your suppliers are, who all your customers are to the rest of the world, because that loses a competitive advantage as you're doing business. Is that the point you were trying to get across, Howard?
Yeah, if you look at the tweet that I actually retweeted at you, that spells it out exactly in those terms. It was...
Yep, I shared it in the chat.
Okay. So basically, the experience of Ripple being quote unquote adopted by Swift, in reality, there was no actual adoption, and the test deployment, grew in complexity because nobody wanted to have their trading accounts balances publicly known.
Yep, interesting. I think that I think this would become more realized, at least perhaps among the business community, as they're sort of devising these systems and get beyond the sort of here's a minimum viable product phase where they're just trying to get a test up and running. Once they start trying to actually use any of these systems, I hope that they'll realize there's just a shortfall there they need to correct. Okay, so and related to other news that happened in Monero in the past few weeks, Monero was added to Exodus Eden, which is it's a multi-wallet desktop wallet, and Eden is their sort of beta testing version. So you can currently use Monero there. It's pretty simple to use. It uses a My Monero type view key model where it's not a full client in the way that a full desktop client normally is, but it's good for people who prioritize convenience, of course. And then another development, Monero's blockchain pruning mechanism was recently merged into the main repo. So pruning is now an available option for nodes. And I created a blog post about this that has also been merged. We're just waiting on the website to be updated so this post can be more widely shared with everybody. But that's really interesting. Bullet proofs are getting even faster with the most recent updates. And beyond that, users will be able to run pruned nodes, which aren't as good as running full nodes, but they're better than using remote nodes. So hopefully that will help individuals who have low power devices be more likely to run nodes compared to just using someone else's copy of the node. So that certainly will help under certain use cases. Perhaps if you're using it on your phone or whatever you're doing. Howard, you've run nodes on your phone before, right?
Run what? Say again?
Nodes on your phone before?
Oh yeah, still do.
Okay. How much bandwidth does that use?
Well, it can use a lot, but I've got an unlimited data plan, so I don't worry about that. Mostly I worry about battery life. And so right now, for example, I run the node with only 4 peers instead of the default 8.
Okay.
And the mobile phone network has me like double netted, so I can't get any inbound connections. So basically, yeah, I've got 4 peer connections and that's it. So that keeps bandwidth under control.
You can't run an open Monero node on your phone?
I can't, you know, I would love to try, but it hasn't worked out.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm in a similar situation here in my apartment where I can't open anything up. Arctic Miner, do you have something?
Well, I run nodes regularly off my laptop, which I then tether off the phone. And I run into the same thing at Howard. It says you can't open the port. It's all blocked. Pretty well, any kind of Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi, etc., you get that scenario where it's firewalled. But I end up balancing bandwidth between using, especially when I'm traveling, between my data and free Wi-Fi, and I effectively can maintain a closed full Monero node. That means one without the port open without a problem. But it's kind of like a bit of a balance sort of thing. But I run it on a laptop. But forget about opening the node. None of them let you do that.
Yep, exactly. Other related news, Benjamin Earl Turner, who is a rapper, released a recent video called Ja Rule that featured Monero several times during the music video, and he actually went on Monero Talk. So if you're interested in learning more about how this one individual sort of found Monero and thinks it's a good symbolistic representation about some of the ideals he really supports and he wanted to really get across in his song, you can check. I highly recommend checking out the video and also the Monero Talk episode where he even mentions Cake Wallet sort of just out of his own volition. He just brought it up. So he's at least used it before, I hope. Um, so it's pretty interesting when you have others that take Monero and sort of apply it in a concept that is outside of the bounds of what we're sort of dealing with the day-to-day, that someone felt that it was a powerful enough symbol for them to include in the arts that they're making. So it's pretty interesting. So I had a question about Cobry come in. I think I'll come back to that in a little bit later, but we can certainly get to that. Other brief related news I really want to cover. So I was in New York last weekend. I had a meetup that was sponsored by Cake Wallet and Monero Talk there in New York at a co-working space. There is a recording on Monero Talk. It's a little difficult to watch, but it still shows the people who were there and covers what I spoke about. That was really useful. Recently, I've been working on Breaking Monero, which is a series that looks at the privacy and security limitations. So we're out with episode 7, remote nodes, episode 8, timing attacks, and episode 9 will be out on Monday. This is a really important episode to feel on poisoned outputs, or the EAE attack, or the NAC attack, or all those different names. So expect that out on Monday. And then we also had the Breaking Zcash episode that came out. Now, we normally want to keep the discussion focused on Monero, and I think we certainly still will do that. But Zcash had some interesting developments this week where they had a counterfeiting vulnerability that they disclosed. And Monero has had counterfeiting vulnerabilities in the past that we've disclosed. So I think it's important to sort of talk a little bit about this and the sort of difficulties with finding these counterfeiting vulnerabilities with privacy cryptocurrencies. In Zcash's case, it was the issue with Sprout. In Monero's case, it was an issue with some of the key images and some other past issues. So I think if people have questions on sort of what Monero does with counterfeiting and the vulnerability response process, I think that'd be something that would be good to cover here. Arctic Mind, can you give a brief overview about what Monero did in the past with Monero's previous counterfeiting bug, and how we could, and what some of the differences are compared to what we've seen in the past week?
Well, the process of the disclosure of the vulnerability was really interesting because it was discovered within the Monero community, and there was a very small group of people that were aware of it, which was basically the core team, some key developers. And so I think the disclosure process was complicated by the fact that it affected every crypto node coin. So there was a process of one patching Monero and then hiding this so that you wouldn't give it away, and then responsibly disclosing to all the other crypto nodes so that they could patch before we went public. So there's like a two-stage complexity because we had, we couldn't just say, well, let's fix Monero and then leave everybody else right out in the open. And so there was the patch was put in place. It was hidden, obfuscated in the code, which is, I can talk about that. And then we disclosed to all of the other crypto nodes, and apparently after the disclosure, Bitcoin got attacked. So there's some question of whether there was a leak at that point within them. And so that was kind of the process of disclosure, I think, was really, really interesting. The technical details, I believe, are on getmonero.org. If you actually look at the specific, it was to do, if I remember correctly, that's not my area of expertise in the project, so I'm going to qualify this. But that there were multiple points on the curve, on the encryption curve, and if you hit another one, you could actually create some counterfeiting. Now, Monero didn't have that attack occur, and it was patched. But like I said, to my understanding, it was Bitcoin was attacked with it.
Yeah, that's about how I remember it. So one question I have, I know that around, so in January there was a Monero hard fork. This is in January 2017. There was a Monero hard fork that added ring CT, and then there was another hard fork, I believe, in April. It was around April, if it wasn't April, that added this fix, and that way we knew that it was patched. And it also changed an important part of Monero's adaptive block size to deal with the larger ring CT transactions. Do you think that Monero would have had this hard fork no matter what, or was this hard fork specifically added for this purpose, if you're aware of that process?
Yes, I am. I mean, when WinCT came in, it was too big for the existing block size, minimum block size limit of 60,000 bytes. So we had to increase that to 300,000. So that's something that had to happen. And what happened is that this became sort of a cover for the vulnerability patch. So we kind of hid it because we did it at the same time. But it was definitely because of the fact that we were patching Monero and also trying to hide it so that we could protect the other crypto nodes. It was sort of the cover. The block size change actually became part of the cover for this. Now those folks would have to happen regardless because of the block size wouldn't really work. The scaling works. Block size only work with the ratio of the transaction to the minimum, like a 15 kilobyte. Sorry, a 30 kilobyte transaction, a 60 kilobyte block size. The fees were being used way too high, so that had to happen to accommodate WinCT. So those folks had to happen regardless, but it was a good cover for this particular problem.
Yeah, certainly. If we already needed the hard fork, so to speak, to change the block size, people probably wouldn't really think that there's something else in there too. So, pretty interesting. Okay, so in regards to, I have like two big discussions slated that I think are of strong importance to the Monero community around this time. The first one is the idea of the Monero Big Bang attack. And by this, it's referring to the ability for individuals to create a large number of transactions within Monero in order to inflate the block size. Monero has an adaptive block size, so the blocks will grow as demand grows, and the concern is that it's potentially too simple currently for an attacker to fill these blocks and make a big hindrance to the Monero network, of course. So, Arctic Mike, can you give like the background knowledge about sort of the initial discovery? You said that you were heavily involved in understanding these vulnerabilities early in Monero's history, and then others can chime in as we go more in depth about what recent research is finding and what the ultimate changes are going forward.
Okay, I mean, basically the Big Bang attack is where you would go in and generate a lot of spam to bloat the block size, and then you're attacking the penalty. And essentially, and there's various ways to look at it depending on whether the miners are cooperating or not. The cost is comparable or slightly higher than that of a 51% attack. Part of the issue that happened, now I actually described a similar attack back in 2016, so this is not that new in that respect, but I think the awareness of this was triggered by the fact that we had a drop in the price of Monero, so now attacking Monero in this respect is more cheaper. That was one factor. There's also some questions of how you estimate it. It's about a factor of 4 difference. If you just, the minimum penalty doesn't actually support the attack, although it was presented that way, because what happens is a miner basically doesn't increase the block size and just takes half the spam and collects the money. So the spammer needs a faster rate than that. To do the maximum attack, you actually have to run it if the miners are not cooperating. So to go to the maximum penalty, it's actually 4 times the block reward. So it's not a cheap attack to run. The problem is, and I think what a lot of the concerns in the community, is that with the drop in price of Monero, now it's sort of looked a lot more viable. And there's various debates. It became a lot more cost effective. But I would caution that this is more expensive than a 51%. So if you have a 51% you can't recover from, that would be the most cost-effective way to go about this, rather than this type of attack. So I've got to caution this because this is important to recognize. That reality hasn't changed. What we have done is basically, and this is what I've been working on, is you can basically mitigate this attack very effectively by increasing its cost. And what you do is, instead of having one the adaptive block size can go really, really fast in the short term, which is what led to the concern. And that's great if you have a short-term burst, such as, for example, you would have at the Christmas season where, you want to have a 10 or 20-fold or 30-fold increase in transaction levels. Visa's numbers actually are actually quite high. They go from about like 2,000 transactions a second to like 40 to 50,000, a matter of a few weeks. So you have the ability to do this ramp up, but you don't need to sustain the ramp up in order to allow Monero to scale properly. And so what we did is we created another long-term limit, which is very slow and gradual, and effectively caps it, so that what happens is if you have a fast ramp up, you will hit a cap that lasts for roughly 50,000 blocks. So there's a temporary cap in a fast ramp up, and then you have a slow rate of growth that would accommodate reasonable long-term growth in the blockchain. And balancing that, and effectively what this does is it drastically increases the cost of the attack. So it prices it, I think, right out of the equation vis-a-vis 51%. And that's kind of what it's been. In fact, when I worked with Sarang and with Monero Mu, and specifically to get this sorted out so we can get it into the code, and we essentially, patch this attack effectively by doing that. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. I mean, there's different alternatives. So this is definitely not the end and be all. There may be more efficient ways of doing the dual medium thing mathematically. So that could be very much an area for research. But the long and short of it is it's just priced right out of the range of the 51% attack range as a result of this. But I do caution, a 51% attack is comparable in cost. And so I have to caution that. So I think we just priced this thing out of the market, basically. So is there any questions on this or comments? Or
When hard cap? Sorry, that was obviously a stupid comment. It was a lot of great context. So I don't know if you've been following that Howard or Need Money 90. Have either of you been following just the adaptive block size changes and developments?
I've been watching some of the discussion on the research channel, but no, I haven't been participating, no.
Yeah, I think this is Arctic Mind's baby.
Yeah.
which is a bit unfortunate, because one of the things that I find that I'd really like to see in the community is more learning about this particular aspect of Monero. It is not something that a lot of people in the community have looked at. It is a very critical component, and quite interestingly enough, it actually makes Monero extraordinarily competitive, even putting aside the entire fungibility aspect with coins such as pretty well all the other open blockchain coins. But it is something that I've spent a lot of time on it, and it really would be great for a lot of people in the community to inform themselves on this, to try to understand it, because it makes it very different from Bitcoin. Fees are fundamentally different from economics in the Bitcoin blockchain and in Bitcoin-like chains. There is a tax that you can do on Bitcoin that you can't do on Monero because of this adaptive block size limit. So it does also open some vulnerabilities to the fast attacks that we're talking about. It is an aspect of the project that I think it'd be really nice to see a lot more knowledge and involvement from the community.
Excellent. So if there's no other questions on this, we can move on to, I know the big discussion that probably everyone's watching this for, it is Monero's current mining network state. So Monero has, to give a little bit of context, right, Monero has currently adopted a policy that every 6 months, with the current network upgrades that it has scheduled every 6 months, it will include a change, often a small change, to its mining algorithm, such that if anyone had developed custom hardware to mine on the old algorithm, that it would hopefully render this hardware unusable going forward. And there's a million sort of considerations here, and I know that this is generally a very heated topic. There are many who feel that ASICs are inevitable, and I think most people agree that long-term ASICs certainly are inevitable. But there's a lot of disagreement even in the short term how we deal with ASICs, and whether we embrace them, whether we postpone them, whether we say that even long term we have no interest with them, and other components about like the ethos about what do we really want Monero miners to look like. So there's a ton of discussion here, both technical and political. And so I know that if individuals have questions, make sure you send them to us so that we can really discuss these here. But recently, this has become a large topic of news because Monero's hash rate has increased significantly over the past few weeks, past few months. And many were giving different speculations. Why would this happen if the price was decreasing, right? If the price was increasing, ideally you should see more hash power come on to fill this demand. But if hardware as we know it from consumer grade equipment hasn't changed significantly over the past few months, and the price has been decreasing slowly as a general trend, why is the hash rate increasing significantly? And there's several people that had different takes on this. However, recently one person looked at the Monero nonce data from mined blocks, and it's by their estimation that about 85% of the Monero network is currently mined by ASICs that were developed for Monero. And they give some assumption. Again, this isn't like a necessarily pure truth, but it's an assumption based off the information they were presented and some information that they received from others based off what likely hash rates these ASICs would provide. So I want to open this discussion here. How about with you first, Need Money 90, just to give your thoughts about like what the situation is and really your sort of perspective on it, because I know a lot of people have different perspectives on this issue and also have different takeaways from how important it is.
This is on the ASIC mining. Sorry, I stepped away for a second.
Yes, this is on ASIC mining.
Yeah. So I can sympathize with the perspectives that people want to move towards an environment where we're effectively just spending pure energy, and that would mean commodification of ASICs. Unfortunately, we're not really in that kind of environment right now, and they promote unwanted centralization. It really is a complicated situation, and I have seen some speculation that Monero can follow something like I think what Grin is doing, where we have one part of the algorithm that's ASIC resistant, and then we slowly transition to an ASIC part of the algorithm where say 90% of the block rewards go to the ASIC resistant one, and the ASICs get 10%, and then slowly the percentage increases to incentivize their creation. I mean, it's a very difficult problem, and I'm not sure that there even is an answer to it. It's complicated.
To give a little bit more background on the dual mining, I know within the Zcash community they proposed this and nearly went forward with it. They just gave it the name harmony mining, where they would have one ASIC friendly algorithm and one algorithm that was supposed to not be ASIC friendly. And I know that they certainly fell into a lot of critical implementation issues, and they decided not to move forward with it. But it's certainly something that many people in the community are toying with as a way to help balance some of these different mining groups and sort of these different incentives here.
There's a lot of interesting work that's being done on, I think it's RandomX now, not RandomJS anymore. But even then, I'm not sure if there even can be a silver bullet to the issue of specialized hardware versus general purpose hardware. Like I suspect it may be like an intractable problem in the long run for an actual decentralized cryptocurrency. But we'll see, I guess.
So Howard, that's your cue.
Yeah, I've got some more definite opinions on all of this topic, I suppose you'd have to say. Okay, let's see. First of all, I was just looking at the network status right now. So we're looking at about 870 megahashes per second. A few weeks ago, it was down at like 350. So at the most, we're seeing 60% new hash rate, which could all be ASICs. All right. I think 85% estimate is overestimating. It's not like these new ASICs have already driven out 50% of the traditional miners in the span of 3 weeks. That hasn't happened. So first of all, that's the scope of the impact that we're seeing. Now, the question of, gosh, if ASICs were ubiquitous, then decentralization would be perfect. And I mean, that's kind of an interesting position, but I don't see that being realistic unless ASICs are usefully embedded in devices that we already buy, for example, mobile phones, right? The average consumer isn't going to wake up one day and say, gosh, I'm going to go down to the store and get a mining ASIC. Even if they're like in every freaking grocery store and convenience store around the world, it's not the kind of a product that people think about buying. So, even if there's multiple manufacturers and they're readily available, which is not the case today, even if that were true, that's not going to decentralize or democratize the mining, right? And then the other question about, can we actually build something that's ASIC resistant? And to me, the answer is obviously yes, right? Because the very nature of an ASIC is to be special function, all right? And what we're going for, say, in random X, is to be general purpose, is to utilize the components of a general purpose CPU, okay? If it were possible to design an ASIC that would run every general purpose program, then these guys would put Intel and AMD out of business. They're not going to do that. They don't have the resource budgets, the research and development expertise. And ultimately they are oriented towards single function circuits. That's what their strength is. And that's not what the strength of a CPU is. And that's, so we're trying to leverage what a CPU can do, because that's really the opposite of what an ASIC can do.
I think your point in regards to people not just going to their local convenience store and picking up an ASIC, I think that's pretty realistic, actually, that they would not do that, because mining is really supposed to be boring long term, I think. Like, it's just something that just sort of happens as a state of network security. Like, you're not going to be like, ooh, let me pick up my new shiny ASIC from the store. Like, ideally, it shouldn't be like that. So I sort of agree with your point there, that if they are commoditized, they're also not likely to be something that people would purchase as like an independent product.
Right. Now, if it turns out that these ASICs are useful for other things and useful enough that they start getting embedded in CPUs, that's a different story. Like AES encryption became so important that, chip makers had to start putting AES accelerators into their CPUs. So it could turn out that there will be some other functional circuit that becomes equally important, and that every CPU incorporates it, and then everybody will have them without even thinking about it. But we're so far away from that happening.
So what are some of the arguments in terms of just designing an algorithm that takes advantage of these things that are already incorporated in normal hardware? Is there anything like AES encryption that we somehow try and work the way into Monero's algorithm?
Well, okay. If you think about a classical ASIC, all right, it is a, I mean, you think about it as a finite state machine, okay? Its operation is purely mechanical. You know, it might have a clock that's ticking off states, but an input goes in and it goes from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 and so on, and an output comes out the other end. It's not making a lot of decisions in the middle, okay? When we start looking at, you know, how to make a mining algorithm that's more CPU oriented, you know, we want to have a changing list of instructions so that, you know, you can't just hard code one sequence of steps and be done with the job, right? We want the set of instructions to change all the time because CPUs are designed to execute any sequence of instructions, right? So they're designed to handle the most general possible set of instructions, and an ASIC is designed to only execute a single set of instructions. When you look at, you know, what makes a CPU able to do its job, well, it has a bunch of components that an ASIC would never have. It's got an instruction fetcher, it's got a decoder, you know, it's got dispatchers and all of these other elements that an ASIC would never have ordinarily. So when you start saying you want to build an ASIC that can also perform this new, say, random X algorithm, it's going to need to add all of these modules that a CPU always has that an ASIC never had before. Did that answer the question, or did I go off in a different direction?
No, I think it answered it. Arctic Mind, did you have something you wanted to chime in and say? You're muted. You muted yourself.
I am muted and muted myself. There we go. A couple of things that I'd like to mention. The first is the threat in the ASIC is essentially its proprietary. That's what makes it monopolistic, and that's what makes it a threat. I mean, this is the argument of commoditization is, can we make it sort of generic so that it's not proprietary? And whether that's possible, it's an entirely separate question. One issue that I would raise with this, and I realize this can be very controversial, so I'm just positioning this, is that we could look at copyright licensing changes with respect to the mining code to put a strong copyleft in there. It's not a simple thing to do, but it could be done. And the idea would be then to create a situation, if you have a decentralized contribution network, which we do, where whoever decides to build proprietary hardware based on that code is exposed to legal liability from random multiple sources at the same time, because now you have decentralized litigation, basically. Any one of the contributors could sue essentially for copyright infringement. So I mean, that's one possibility, is to harden the thing by changing the license. This is controversial because a lot of people feel that it has to be a BSD type license, a very permissive license, and there are valid reasons for that too. So I'm not trying to be, but just simply saying, I'm just throwing out, there is another weapon you could throw at the ASIC battle, which is licensing, which I think has not really been discussed at all. But I agree with a lot of Howard's assessment. I mean, essentially, you can design something that is random or changes enough to keep these things off balance and maintain, and the objective being to create something that's commoditized. One thing I would mention is, in theory, you could people would go to a store to buy a heater, so you could actually have commoditized ASIC heaters that produce heat in the winter and people could use for mining, that they would go to the store and buy. The whole economics of proof of work mining historically tends to eliminate or not consider the cost and or value of the heat produced in the process. We just look at the energy consumption versus the cost of the currency, but we're not asking the question, okay, what about the heat? Is it a waste product to be getting rid of, or is it something valuable? that you want to use to heat your home, for example. And my sort of experience on this is that to a degree, the heat is valuable, and when it gets too centralized, then it becomes a waste product. So if you have your apartment or your home or whatever, and you have a room that's cold, then it's cost effective for you to mine in order to keep that room warm. But once you got the room warm, then it's no longer cost effective. There's some other arguments with solar panels to where you have excess energy available in the summer, which is valuable in a decentralized position, but not valuable in a centralized position. You can't sell it back to the grid, for example. So I think the economics in mining that we have to sort of broaden the issue than just look at that. So those are the kind of the two things I'll throw into this debate. I mean, can you change the license to sort of keep the ASIC manufacturers even more off balance, because now you're open sourcing their ASICs basically, and also the question of the cost of the heat or the value of the heat.
Yeah, I think some pretty interesting points there from different perspectives. Now, in regards to the first one about a license situation, you can try and license it, but we're in a current state now where we're sort of assuming that a lot of the Monero network is controlled by ASICs, but we don't know of what entity is mining these. We don't really, at least it's not known to the wider community really who's the person that's developing all this hardware. So how do you think that a sort of legal liability threat is really reliable in this case where anyone can show up and mine without us knowing who this entity is?
No. As a standalone, no. As a complement, it can be helpful. I think the situation, because basically you want to, this threatens the sort of open, but the people that are open about it are centralizing. So it's just another tool in the quiver. And I would emphasize, this is, I think, something that's going to take more than one approach to deal with the centralizing threat. I don't think it's a single one solution, at least at this point. Right now, I mean, what we're doing of kind of randomly changing the proof of work on subsequent forks is a solution. I think the kind of software approaches that Howard is proposing make a lot of sense as a way. I'm simply saying that we may want to have a more multifaceted solution where you just don't have one angle of attack. But yes, I do agree that if you have a especially hostile attacker, the creating this liability is an issue. Now, one thing that what I was referring to can help with, which can also be a threat, is cloud mining, where somebody gets up a whole bunch of maybe GPUs or whatever and rents the mining out. That can also be a very strong centralizing threat, because that cloud miner actually controls. Once you give the money to the miner, you can't just pull it back. If you're hashing in a pool, you can say, well, that pool is attacking the network, so I'm going to take my hash rate somewhere else. If you give money to somebody to cloud mine, that is they have control now. Now, one interesting thing about it, and again, there's a legal argument against these, is that they effectively are selling a security. So there is a legal attack against the cloud miners because they basically are selling a security. So that gives us a legal angle from there. But I'm just saying that there are threats that can be mitigated with legal issues and legal threats, even in a decentralized network. So it is an angle that we can look at. That's basically, but rather than simply saying as a standalone, no.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks for bringing in those different perspectives. I think it's important to have a good understanding, at least, of what number of options really are available at least on the table, because I know that it is generally a complex topic, and we don't really have a great answer here of how to purposely do things. So I suppose one last question for everyone here. How concerned are people currently with the state of Monero's mining network? We know that something is up based off how the nonces are being recorded and being used. So does that mean that we need to be really concerned about the actual security of Monero's network, or we generally think for the most part, we should still be okay. And this can go to whoever chimes up first, who has the strongest opinion.
Well, the security has a bunch of different meanings, right? The privacy of the network is not being threatened. Now, the validity of transactions, I suppose we could be exposed to a rollback attack at some point down the road. So there's, that's where the threat may be.
And do you think that's a likely occurrence? Do you think it's a rare occurrence? What's your general take there?
No idea.
Arctic Mind?
Well, my thought is that it's a complex problem from the attacker's perspective also, because they don't know what on earth the community is going to do. I mean, this is one of the things that happened with the last attack. I mean, right now there is code in the pipeline that could get merged. It's not clear when it's going to get merged from the perspective of an attacker. It's unclear what's going to happen like 2 to 3 months. Are we going to find the need for some other tweak or some other change, and then we're going to add another fork in there? So I think there's enough uncertainty being created by the community that keeps these people off balance. That's what's happened at this point in time. But it's a dynamic situation, so we're kind of seeing a threat and responding to it, keeping them off balance. I am a bit more concerned, mainly because of the threats that have generally been made against other coins. And I'm very specific about this. When I read the threats that were made by Sharkpool and Bitcoin SV, I mean, ironically, they threatened everybody but Monero. And that to me is an eye-opener. I mean, of the kind of things that people are thinking of doing. And it had an impact on the market. I mean, the market crashed a good 50-60% as a result of some of this kind of stuff. So yes, there's a threat out there. I'm not sure who it is. I'm not even sure if it is related to this broad-based threat through Sharkpool against every other coin, and people are getting the ASICs ready to attack Monero. But I also think there are enough countermeasures dynamically happening in the community to mitigate the threat. So we're sort of in a dynamic balance right now. That's how I would see it. So I'm not worried, but I'm not worried because of all the stuff that's going on, and not only what it does, all these changes, but the uncertainty it creates for the attacker.
Thanks. Need Money, do you have an opinion on this? Maybe I had to run away for a few minutes. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm kind of worried about the hash rate, but I also recognize that these people are economically rational, because otherwise they wouldn't have been building specialized hardware. I've heard some rumors that the hardware right now isn't ASICs or isn't FPGAs, and it's instead ASICs, somewhere around like a couple generations old tech. I believe the numbers that I heard were like 65 nanometers. Don't quote me on that. So it's nowhere near current tech, but more energy efficient than our current hardware. But if they're economically rational, they did this to make a profit. They're going to want to go and extend it for as long as possible. I don't see why I can see why there's a ton of urgency, but I don't think that it's as big of a deal as a lot of people are making it out to be, just because the most profitable thing for these people is not to crash the price of the network and the mining.
Okay, thank you. Are there any last topics that we need to cover? We're getting into the hour mark here. Any last things you want to cover in this coffee chat here? Now's your last chance. Nothing? Okay. So we had one question that came in that I promised I'd make sure to answer. It was on the state of Kovri. And honestly, the short answer is no one really knows what the state of Kovri is, but ultimately the most likely set of circumstances is that Kovri is not maintained anymore. That's just kind of the most likely truth, the most likely result that's going to come out of this. So as a result, it doesn't mean, though, that Monero is not going to use Tor or I2P. Recently, the functionality for Monero to support SOCs has been merged So that way Monero can support Tor and I2P. And actually, some of the Monero contributors have done a really awesome job at making sure that I2P will work to the best extent possible. So what most likely that means is that after the next upgrade, users will have the option to, at least for the update that's coming up, they can manually configure to use I2P for broadcasting the transactions, for even trying to sync with other wallets and other sort of behaviors. And then I think in the fall of 2019, we'll be looking for how to implement it more directly so that a large portion of the Monero ecosystem is sort of using this type of framework by default. So even though Cobri likely will not see any more development in the future, I can't certainly say that it won't. It's an open source project. Theoretically, people can still make changes to it. But ultimately, I think the large opinion is that it likely will not receive much development going forward in the future. Okay, so with that, thank you so much, HYC, Arctic Mind, and Need Money 90 for joining me today for the this month's coffee chat. I know that others who are at TabCon, they of course popped in and they said hi, so it's great to see them. Unfortunately, they're just too busy to hang out at the moment with us, but ultimately, we're really happy to have these. We'll be looking forward to have these again in about another month. Make sure to stay up to date with the rest of the Monero community developments. And check out Breaking Monero if you haven't already, which is on the same channel that you're currently watching. Or if you're watching it on the podcast, it's also on the same podcast. So thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Justin. I'll see you guys.
Take care, everybody.
All right, take it easy.